everyone, it's Desiree. I am here finally, I always say that, but with part 2 of the Simon Says February card kit. And stay tuned, this is going to be a really jam-packed weekend, lots of announcements going on in each of the videos that we're going to give. So let's get started. So card number 6, I'm going to use one of the embossing folders, and I cut this panel down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 from the pattern paper in the kit. It just gave it some texture. Very simple, nothing more, believe it or not. So I'm just going to adhere this using my tape runner down onto my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 top folding card base. So that's going to be cut 4 1/4 by 11 inches, and then of course it's scored at 5 1/2. So I just adhered that straight down onto the card base, and this is a piece of scrap Canson XL watercolor paper. So this has been cut down to 1 inch by 4 1/4. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment, Crafter's Gonna Craft, using my Versamark ink, and I'm going to be using my Snow, which is white, embossing powder by Recollections. I'm going to heat set that, and I'm actually going to use, I'm drying that. Again, no cards were harmed in this video. I'm actually going to use the sample of Daniel Smith watercolors that they gave, but I'm only going to use one of the colors, and I'm using the blue-green shade. This was very interesting paint. Daniel Smith watercolors are absolutely phenomenal with their pigments. The pigments are very true, I guess you can say. But I'm also using the aqua brush that came in the kit, and I'm going to actually remember to zoom in this time. And the one thing that I love about watercolors is just watching them move. I am not in any way, shape, or form a watercolor artist. I literally just love watching that movement that these watercolors take when they hit the water. And this watercolor really fascinated me because it has these 2 tones in it. It looks blue, but there's this green undertone in it that just granulates, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So I literally just splash that down on top of the sentiment. I think it's very simple, and you can see those 2 colors. It's not 2 watercolors. That just came from the one sample there. So I don't know if it's because I didn't mix it up or the way that it granulates. I just really liked the look of it, and I think it matched this panel really well. So after I dried that, I'm going to use my double-sided foam tape, and I'm just going to put some to the back of that and then adhere that over the front of this. And again, remember that pattern paper just has some texture to it. Fortunately, I did lose part of this video. Yes, imagine that. I actually did use the gems from Katya Studio that came with this and put them in some of the center of the flowers. So I apologize. Oh, I did not lose the video on this. See how well I'm losing my mind here? Sorry about that. So here you can see me using the gemstones from Katya Studio and just putting them in the center of the flowers. It's been a long week. Lots of snowstorms going on. So for card number 7, I pulled in some of my Nouveau Mousse in aquamarine, and I grabbed one of the wooden chip pieces. Now, when it comes to your Nouveau Mousses, they all come with this foil top. Try to keep that. It helps preserve the mousse for it to stay moist, or to stay wet in this pan. Even though you've torn into it, you know, like I have, but it will help to preserve it so that it can stay the creamy consistency. It's very easy to clean off your finger, and I just covered this wooden piece up with that aquamarine. It will dry on the wood, just like anything else, so I'm going to set that aside so that it can dry. I'm then going to take this this panel here. Now this was cut 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. It will be cut down with the die, but I'm first going to use this long strip, and I'm going to use my VersaFine Black Onyx, and I'm going to stamp this on each edge. So, but I'm just going to come in just a little bit because I know the die that I'm going to use, which is, yes, the wonky die from My Favorite Things, it will actually cut that panel down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm grabbing now a piece of scrap, white paper, Nina Solar, and I'm going to use my VersaFine ink, and I'm going to stamp Crafter's Gonna Craft, again, just down on the very bottom, and then I'm going to use my clear embossing powder by Recollections, just to give it some gloss, some shine to it. And then once that's set, we're going to trim that down so that it's a small strip eventually. So here I am pulling in my wonky die. I'm going to make sure that it's balanced over the 2 strips that I stamped so that they're on each of the edges. I then also used my Spellbinders jagged edge die set to cut out a piece of the pattern paper that matches closely to the wooden piece that I chose. And then I used some vintage photo and my blending tool just to put some color on the edge. I just really like that look, and this paper just really did have a vintage feel for me, which is something that I loved as well. So you can see I trimmed down the sentiment. I'm going to adhere it to the back of that wooden piece there so that it looks like it's coming from the dress form. And then I'm going to fishtail the other end. And then, of course, we always curl the fishtails. You know me. Always got to curl them. And now I'm just going to play around with the placement of where I want this exactly to go. I'm using my art glitter glue to adhere this down because I could not find the Simon Says glue. It was somewhere on my table. If you all could see the outer portion of what the screen is showing, you would just be amazed at how I can find anything. Again, I'm grabbing a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 top folding card base, and I'm just going to adhere this down using my art glitter glue since I raised up the center panel with my double-sided foam tape. I'm just going to press down on the banner. And now I've pulled in my glossy accents, and I'm going to cover the wooden piece and go right over the mousse, the Nouveau mousse. Now, it's not going to move it or anything like that, but it's just going to give it just a little bit of shine. So for the next card, I've actually pulled in one of the envelopes that was part of the kit, and you all know me. I like to tear apart these envelopes. I do use them. But there are times where I really want to just cut them up because the paper is just so beautiful. So I'm going to cut off the edges just so I can have that big center panel. And then I've pulled in my penny black antique frame dies, which I love these just as much as my wonky. And I'm going to now, and I've set that aside now that I've cut that. So now I'm going to use the other embossing folder, and I'm using 3 distress inks, and I'm using Festive Berries, I believe Abandoned Coral, and Worn Lipstick, and I've just grazed over where it's raised in the folder and ran it through my machine. So now I have it sitting in the creases, and it cleans off very well from the embossing folder, so don't worry, it won't stain. It just washes away, and now I'm going to spray it. So this is going to make the colors move. It's going to make them move in the crevices. I'm going to keep adding some water, gently tap it on my table so I can get those colors dripping and drooping all over the place. I'm going to add some more colors right on top of this card base after it was dry. You don't want to do it when it's wet. You could take the chance of the paper pilling. This is Canson XL watercolor paper. And again, this is cut. I just take a sheet and quarter it, and I have stacks of that. So that's 4.5 by 6. So now I'm looking where I want to cut the piece out using a smaller antique die. So I really liked the drips that were coming down. And again, I'm going to use our our vintage photo distress ink and just go around the edges as well, just to pull that panel up. I'm also going to use the double-sided Scotch 3M tape. And I pulled in, before I attach everything, on the envelope piece that I cut, I'm going to use the sentiment, sending you a handcrafted hello from so very far away. And I'm going to use my Gold Recollections embossing powder. I was going to use the double-sided tape again, and I'm like, I didn't want to do that. So I grabbed a piece of scratch paper. I found my Simon Says glue, as you can see, and I just wanted to put that piece of envelope paper on top of this piece, just to make it a little bit more sturdier. And I wanted to distress these edges, which will make this paper fold. You can see it's bending, because this paper is thin for the envelope. So it's going to kind of show the glue lines and all of that. And I was okay with that. I wanted it to look very distressed, as if we handcrafted this card. I adhered the watercolor panel, and I'm using my tape runner for the base to put it on a white 4¼ by 5½ top folding card base. I'm grabbing my glossy accents again and just putting it over the heart within the O, so that I can give it just a little bit of shine when it dries. For our next card, yep, we're pulling in our Distress Oxides. Of course, they had to make another appearance. This here, what I'm using, is just regular Nina Solar paper. It's not a Bristol, it's not a watercolor. And I specifically arranged the stamps from the stamp set. So I'm using that large striped one, the dotted line, and then some of the artist icons or creative icons, let's say. And we're just going to create a rainbow using all of these colors. So this is picked raspberry. This here is spice marmalade, wild honey, cracked pistachio, broken china, and wilted violet. So as I'm putting the ink onto the stamps, I'm making sure they overlap a little bit so that they will blend. When you press it down, the ink will actually merge together just a little bit. And again, I was okay if I had some direct lines. I did when I found that there were some really strong ones. I kept on just working back and forth with the ink pads, and I wasn't contaminating my ink pads. You're only talking about a small area, but it's easy to remove from the pad when you go to use them again. I'm going to stamp them down on one side of this card base here, or this card design panel, what I like to call it. And just going to keep it there for a little bit so that the inks can transfer down. And you can see we've got this cute little rainbow. It's not perfect. I probably could have worked it just a little bit more, but I kind of like it. Again, it's a homemade card, and it's handmade. It doesn't have to be perfect. So once again, I'm going to use the Sentiment Crafter's Gonna Craft, and I'm going to put that coming right out of the scissors. I'm going to adhere this right on down to my 4¼ 5½ top folding card base. And again, when I used my die, it cut it down to 4 by 5¼ And this is the wonky stitch die by My Favorite Things. My iridescent sequins, I've missed them for a while, haven't used them, so I've pulled those out. And I'm going to use my art glitter glue, and I'm using my wax pencil. I found that on Amazon. Nail artists for the gems actually use these, and I think it works great. I got a package of 10 for like $10. I'll never have to buy another one. And I'm just applying some sequins all around that card. For the last card, and I have to say, I think this one's my favorite, I pulled out my Distress markers again. I'm using one of the pattern papers, the wood tone, and I used one of my stitched circle dies, and the diameter of that circle is 3.5. So if you have just a plain circle die, that's 3.5. You could use that, but you can use any size. I stamped the solid envelope in the circle with my VersaFine Black Onyx ink and used my clear embossing powder from Recollections just to give it some shine. I'm going to be using a smaller circle die, and that one actually measures approximately 3 inches, but again, any size can be used. And I've chosen 6 colors out of my distress markers, the primaries, and I'm just scribbling coming off of this circle. So I have a red, an orange, a yellow, green, blue, and purple. It didn't get too crazy. Basic rainbow here. Didn't get into all the colors like I did before. So now I'm going to pull in my aqua brush again, and I'm going to smear out these colors. This is a Bristol paper that I'm using for this technique. And then after I'm done smushing it out, I'm actually going to use what's left on the brush and splatter it down onto the paper within their area. So you've got the solid line of the color and then some splatters coming off of that. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect. Once it's done, we let it dry, and I think it came out pretty cool. I'm going to use that die, and I'm going to cut that circle out. I'm going to prop this up on with some double-sided foam tape. Did you notice I didn't use too much fun foam? And I'm going to set that down. I didn't want to center it. We all know I don't like to center things. I got to have a little bit of quirkiness going on there. But setting it down within the circle, and then I'm using the sentiment, you make everything colorful. And I'm stamping that right down onto the 4 1/4, 5 1/2 top folding card base. I'm going to use my art glitter glue because, again, I couldn't find the glue that I had before. And I'm going to set this down on my panel. So remember, where all the color is right now, that's on a Bristol. It's like a watercolor paper. It can be used. And you can see what that looks like. I'm now going to take these markers and scribble them onto an acrylic block. And I'm going to create some splashes down onto the card base directly. What I like about this is the difference in the splatter that you get from the Bristol paper for when you just splatter onto a regular cardstock. Now I'm actually trying some new paper here for my card bases. This is not a Nina. This is actually a paper, it's called, I think, Mohawk. I get it from the Paper Mill store, and it's 110 pounds. It is wonderful. Really playing with it. Especially the next thing I want to try it with is alcohol markers. So I'll let you know how this goes. But it is a nice sturdy weight for card bases, and it's a fraction of the cost of what a ream of Nina Solar Crest 110 pound is. So that's this card. I have to say, I think this one is my favorite. I really like the way that it came out. So showtime. So these are the cards that we did. This is part 2 from the Simon Says February card kit. I know this one came out, but there has been so much going on. So keep an eye out for a couple videos that I'm actually going to almost launch back to back this weekend. We are going to have a jam-packed weekend on the 10th and the 11th. There's going to be an announcement on my Stampin' Up! And Paper Pumpkin and the demonstratorship. There's going to be an announcement with Tonic Studios, and so forth. So stay tuned. It's all very exciting. I am so glad everybody enjoyed the first installment of the technique video. There is so much more to come. Everything that I used will be linked down below. If you like this video, hit the like up, or the thumbs up, sorry. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. If you have any questions or would you like to leave a comment, please also do that down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Always remember, everyone, be creative and stay tuned.